to you. John, you're on mute, by the way, at the moment. I don't know if you realized. So if you're talking, unmute yourself, please.
There you go.
Okay.
So, Alan, I'll check with you, mate. You can see the screen, yeah?
Yeah, can hear you and see the screen. So yeah, over to you.
Perfect. So, hi, everybody. We're going to talk about the operating model process improvement with this session. It's going to be a high-level overview, and it's pretty much the steps you normally take on any operating model process improvement journey. As Alan mentioned, questions at the end of the presentation, and we'll stop halfway through. And if you ask a question on the text, there's mentors and leads that are on the call as well. They'll put some of their experience and answer some of those questions as well, so feel free to push it through the texting. What's in it for you? We got a couple of questions, obviously, as an introduction to this session, and they were to do with, you know, I'm looking for experience from this. I'm already in this area, and I'm looking for other ideas in this area. No matter what your level of expertise or your experience or your role is, there'll be something in this presentation that will either be an aha moment, or it'll be something that you can pick up in your own role and run with when you're back in your own companies, or something even for you to just go and investigate further and research further. So, without further ado, let's begin with what is an operating model. I'm going to rush through the first bits quite quickly, but like Alim said, I will stop at various phases for questions and just some clarification and things. So, an operating model. As you can see on the screen now, I've put a very high level or a business operating model on there. And operating models are set up to support the business in meeting its goals. And it's pretty much the reason and the reason why it exists. Every department has them, or every function has them. And for the purposes of this presentation, we will be focused on, obviously, the IT side of things. You can look at this one now, and like I said, it was high level, so it's a value delivery chain. There's an organizational part to this, locations, information, suppliers, and a management system. From an IT perspective, and I know I will pause after this because I know Alim wants to just add a couple of things here, but you can see the 6 things in a pretty standard IT operating model. And these are the things that we're going to be talking about today and focusing on. As part of any IT operating model process improvement journey, there's a couple of phases that you have to go through. Right? So the first thing what we're going to talk about is gathering a current state. Then we're going to talk about planning a future state, or a ToBe. And then we're just going to finish finally on a summary and a few takeaways in there. There is a third phase in this, as in the how to actually get there, right? So you've got an AsIs state, and you've got a where you want to be state, and then there's the how to bit. That's a subject all on its own. So we're not going to touch on that too much or in too much detail on this one. We're just going to finish with a summary and a few takeaways, and perhaps if you want to do a one-on-one session with either myself or some of the mentors, or we even decide to do another one going forward, then we can start talking about that how-to in more detail. So, gathering a current state. Lots of initiatives when we start this, seem to grab a particular process. They'll benchmark it against a known best practice or a framework like an ITIL or a PRINCE or whatever you want to use in your organizations, and you'll benchmark the process that you've got against a best practice framework. You'll take like a gap analysis within that, and then off you go on your journey. What I want to do here, and what I'm going to concentrate on here, is you need to bring it back one step further, and you need to start thinking about understanding your current operational state. So there's three areas here I'm going to concentrate on. Understand your current operational state, understanding your customer, and understanding your business. It's really, really important to start from the beginning. As it says in the top left on there, you can't improve what you don't measure. I'm sure everybody has heard that phrase. From an operational perspective, you can go into these in as much detail as you want, or you can just briefly look at these because you might already know this or have been part of this process in the start. It's just, I'm putting it in here because it's a really important part to be knowledgeable about and to research and to understand. So ways you can understand your current operational state is have a look at some historical balance scorecards. Balance scorecards, these keep track of how the business is doing. They're every quarter, every month, depending on what business they are. It's a really good idea to have a look at it and just figure out where we're at. Other ways of looking, other places to look is historical service level reporting. How's it running? Are we meeting SLAs? All this plays a really big part in your next phase of where do you want to be. If you don't know where you are, then planning where you're going to be and how to get there is a lot more difficult. The next part is, it's a little bit higher level, resourcing and pricing models. So are there enough people to carry out the job? What's the baseline? What's the pricing model? Like I said, it's quite high level, but it's still of value to understand that. Something that I think a lot of people miss out on when they're doing a current state analysis is this employee engagement. So are your staff engaged or not? With an engaged workforce, it's going to be a lot easier to get to your state, to your future states that you want to get to. And then finally is the customer satisfaction, or NPS, or that's just a common one that's used. But just what do your customers think about you? It's a really good, and that customer could be an internal customer, obviously. It's a really good thing to understand about whether you're meeting some expectations of an internal or an external customer. The next one is a customer again, and like I said, it can be an internal or an external one. And there's some things I'm just going to fly through here. CSAT, VOC, and NPS, which is customer satisfaction, voice of the customer, or a net promoter score. Again, all good topics to research, and they'll be at the end. The next two, they've already been done in some kind of way, but it's still a good thing to search and have a look for. Demography is just the statistics about all your customers and things, and ethnography is the description of the peoples and things and cultures and customs and habits, mutual differences and things. All that's probably already been done in the business model about why you exist anyway, but it's a really good way to some really good information to have a look at. And the third and final one is your actual business. And the reason why I've put this in is because it is really, really important to understand your own business. The things that you're looking for are your company values. Okay, it's really, really important to know your company values, because when you start thinking about, so what is the future state that we need to get to and why, company values play a really big part in it. What's the company mission statement? Okay, so if your future state that you want to go to doesn't align with a mission statement, if you say in 5 years this operating model is going to help us get here, and that's not part of a mission statement, then you're at loggerheads already, right? You're on two different paths. Why do they exist? Why are you what value do you bring to the sector that you're in? It's a really good thing to understand and to just jot down. And then lastly is this strategic plan. So again, a little bit like that mission statement is, what is the strategic plan of the business? Because your operating model, your future state, needs to align with that strategic plan. Like I said, just to finish off this little section, it was very brief, and you can look at this in as much detail as you want to, if you don't know that much, or if you already know all this, it's just a case of reminding you. Alan, would you want me to just
Yeah,
stop?
no, we can stop there. I think you've gone through quite a lot of content, haven't you?
Yeah, I have.
Some people, it will just resonate with them and what they know. For others, maybe there were some terminologies there that they thought, actually, I want to know more about that. So let's see if anyone has any questions. Nothing's come in the chat, but if anyone has a question for John on what you've just seen, please don't hesitate to ask, but just remember to unmute yourself first. If you don't want to speak, but you have a question that you want to put in the chat, and as I said, to do that, and I will raise it on your behalf. So any questions on what's been covered so far? Jason, I think you've unmuted yourself.
Yes, I have. So that was great. First part of the presentation. One of the difficulties that I currently face is that a lot of that current state stroke as is assumed. So when I'm looking at a target operating model initiative where I'm sort of going on to planning a future state ToBe, I actually meet quite a lot of resistance in spending time having a look at the current state as is. Is that common, or is that unique to our to our specific environment?
John, do you want to go answering that first, and I'll pass you on to some other mentors as well. So,
yeah, for sure. So yeah, you are absolutely correct, and it is very, very common. And I don't mean to come across as bagging my own industry and stuff, but IT are brilliant at this. IT are very, very good at assuming states, or assuming what, for want of a better word, what the customer wants. We're quite bad at actually sitting down and asking them. We seem to make technology decisions or future state decisions saying we know what they want. So you're not alone. And I think this is why I put this in as a gathering a current as-is state. It is super, super important to know this. And as you'll see when we go into this future state ToBe, it gives you a lot better stance to then sell the future state. If you can say, hey, this is what our customers and our business are doing and saying and thinking, this is what our CEO said, this is our current stats, this is how we're actually doing, and this is where we're going to get to and what's going to change in that, it's a lot easier to sell. Whereas if you just assume, then more often than not, you get to that future state and it doesn't provide the value that you said right at the start.
So yeah, great question. So I have a comment or two to make, but let me just keep opening up to see if there's anyone else that wants to provide any commentary on that from their experience.
Hello.
Hi, Tola. Yes.
Yes, I think you've actually got to have an as-is and a ToBe, because essentially, like In said, because you're going to have to do a gap analysis against your current baseline to where you want to be. And it's that gap analysis which is going to identify for you your eventual deliverables, which you might have to, which you're going to need in your number of projects, which are now going to come about as a result of this. If you're just looking at the end point and not looking from the starting point, how do you know when you get there? Okay.
That's a great point.
Jason, from my perspective, so I think if I answered your question, it was around doing the as is and either getting some pushback from people saying, but whatever the pushback is, whatever their reasons are, or making assumptions about what it is. So either way, what I found works is when I'm doing my as-is gap analysis, my as-is findings, I'll use a model such as an ISO model. So if it's ITIL, for example, if it's service management, say ISO 20000, if it's security related, 27001. And I'll use that model so that it's a bit more objective and independent in that I have to ask these questions. These aren't the ones I've made up. I have no choice about it, but this is what we are assessing against. So I'm going to go through these methodically, and I need answers against this criteria. And then even where I'm maybe, fobbed off or some points are exaggerated, that's where I push for documents. I know there's a balance between it all. We obviously can't take too long, but I do undertake it in a more audit fashion. And then also, of course, in this case, sometimes it helps when it's a third party doing it. Not that I'm selling myself here, but if it's someone else undertaking that assessment, that audit, then sometimes it gets a bit more traction. But I hope that answers your questions. But don't hesitate to come through with a follow-up if you want.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you. They're all good. They're all good points. I think the point around using ISO 20000 in my case for ITSM and be sort of methodical and unemotional and very very sort of pragmatic based on the standard is actually something I hadn't considered, and that's a great pointer. So so thank you.
Okay, no worries. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, so over to you, John.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've just done gathering the current state, so the as is. We're going to have a look at this future state or planning to be. So as you can see on the screen now, you've got to start with a why, right? So why are you doing what you are doing, right? So you've had a look at that as is state, and now you've realized, right? So why are you wanting to change an operating model? It can't just be because it's an improvement that we want to do. There has to be a why. A good tool around that is the 5 whys, so that gets you to an actual reason for why you are actually changing your model. So like I said on there, start with why. The next bit is it can get very, very overwhelming. That it seems like there's a huge task to actually undertake. So a good way of looking at it and breaking it down is to have a look at these 3 kind of sections, for want of a better word. So the people, process, and tools. And I'm sure everybody's heard of that trifecta of sections to look at. So it's a really good way to just segregate the work that needs to be done, and then you can kind of get a feeling of where it sits about what you're going to try and get to. The next thing is, because it's quite a big goal that you're going to, it's really important to break it into smaller steps. I think one of the attendees just mentioned the gap analysis side of things. So there are 2 other tools there as well that you can use. So there's a SWOT, which is a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. There's PEST or PESTLE, which is the political, economical, social, tech, environment, and legal. And then gap analysis, right, which is exactly what it says. It's what's your current state, what's your future state, and what's the gap. And that gap will normally uncover an area that will help you with your why. Okay, so your why statement will then be because we are failing to do this, or we want to get better at this. And obviously those are all things that add up to, the smaller things add up to this big goal that you're trying to get to. The next bit is about SMART goals. I'm sure quite a lot of people have heard about SMART goals, but it's quite a simplistic way of looking at things, but it's a very effective way. And I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but specific, measurable, attainable results and time bound. You keep to those 5 parts, then you will get a goal that you will understand when you're successful in reaching it, and it will be very clear to communicate to everybody else. So the next thing is, it's really, really important. You're not going to be doing this just on your own. You're going to have a team, or you're going to have stakeholders, you're going to have business users and things that need to be on board as part of this. So you need to communicate this to every level and to every stakeholder. It's really important that everyone's on board with what you're doing and why you are doing it. If they understand the why and there's a what's in it for them type scenario, then you're more likely to get support for it, and other people are aligned, and they will start doing things towards that too. The last thing, so you have a great understanding of your current state, and you've used all these analysis tools, the SWOT, the PESTLE, and the GAP, and other things to get a future state and a gap between that. You've got a clear why statement, so just do that final check. Is it aligned with the values? Is it in line with the mission statement? Is it in budget? Is it, just those final checks. And then once you've done those final checks, so you can, where are we now? You've ticked. Where do you want to be? You've done all your analysis, you've done your SWOT, PESTLE, GAPs, you know where you want to be. Then there's this, how do we get there? Like I said at the start of this is a whole topic on its own. There are multiple ways to skin the cat, or to reach the goal. So we're not going to go into this in too much detail here. But I do want to point out that the only difference between success and failure is this execute things. So I've got a lot of experience in IT, and I have seen a hell of a lot of great plans and great ideas on paper, in boardrooms, in offices, up on whiteboards. I've even seen them get as far as, your Kanban boards and things, right? But it's the ability to execute that and to stay on point, stay with the plan. That is the difference between kind of success and failure. And when you have that why statement and you have a clear purpose, then this executing becomes a lot easier, and you have a lot more kind of support for that too. The bit that I want to say in there is about getting this added to like a project pipeline, getting it added to the strategic plan, or even if it's just a smaller process improvement of a really well-oiled operating model, then it's maybe a CSI register. We get it onto a CSI register. There needs to be, even just to do that, there needs to be a reason or a value that you're doing this for. And some things, this is going to be a bit of a high level one, but some things that I've seen in the past are a value proposition canvas. So you can use this at any level. Okay, so what this basically says, it might look a little bit complicated, and it can be depending on what level you use it at, but basically what it is what is the problem and what is your product or your initiative going to do to fix it? That's it in its simplest form. Your customer has wants, fears and needs, and you've got benefits, features and experience that counteracts what they're feeling or the future state that you want to get to. It's a really, really good tool to research and get really good at, because again, it basically puts that what's in it for me. It gives people skin in the game. They kind of go, yeah, I do want some of that. So they are then a lot more supportive of the initiative. If there's nothing in it for them, then you'll tend to get that pushback, or when you need that support, it won't be there. The final thing on your to-do list is obviously to monitor progress. So, to keep having those stages where you check in and go, so are we on track to deliver? Are we on the same plan? Do we want to change anything? Do we need to pivot? All that kind of stuff. It's a really, really important part, is to monitor your progress through that. I think that's the planning a future state to be. So I'm going to pause there, Alim, and open it up again.
Yeah, so no questions have come in from the chat, even though I'm trying. So I'm trying to prompt questions. But so either you're doing an amazing job where you're answering all the questions through the presentations, or people want to ask verbally now. So let's see, let's open it up. So remember, if you have a question to ask, please unmute yourself and ask away, especially if something has, as I said, prompted you to think about a scenario you're facing or something you're unsure of. I think, Hilary, you've unmuted yourself.
Yes, just a question for John about the experience part of the that value proposition. So you said, you've got the experience part. Is that where you take I don't know, maybe service levels or something that you're delivering for the customer, and you're using statistics to measure yourself against? Is that what you mean by experience?
Yeah, so absolutely with that. So like I said right at the start, in that current state or as-is phase, you're learning all about that, right? You're learning whether you are meeting service levels. You're learning whether you are exceeding them, being great for the customer. Are you on track? Are you under budget? Are you over resourced? You're learning all that stuff, right? That's a lot of that is data driven, especially in our world. So getting hold of that stuff, then actually addressing the actual problem with that. So when people say, hey, we need to up our service levels, you kind of, that 5 whys. Why do you want to up our service levels? Oh, because we're not meeting them. Yeah, but why are we not meeting them? Because we're not getting to our stuff on time. So why are you not getting to your stuff on time? And you just keep going until you get to the actual problem. And it could be that, because we're understaffed. Great. Why are you understaffed? And you can keep going and going and going until you get to the point of where you are addressing the problem that's been highlighted and what you're trying to address. So yeah, that experience part is that data-driven scenario about addressing the problem on the other side. So what someone wants to change or what you need to change. I hope that answers.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
So if there's not any other questions.
No, yeah, I was on mute actually. I was asking, I was trying to prompt, but yeah. So I'm unmuting myself. But no, it doesn't seem like there are any other questions.
Perfect. So I will move on just to this last bit where just to kind of summarize. So I'm not going to go verbatim on here, but it is super, super important. And I think one of our attendees mentioned this at the start. If you do not know where you currently are, then getting to a future state is really, really difficult. Planning that middle bit is a really, really difficult bit, almost impossible. You can guess, and sometimes you'll be correct, because the problem is so obvious. But you won't be doing yourself justice, and you won't be setting yourself up for a better success unless you understand that initial bit that we mentioned. So understanding that current state and the rules around changing it, so you have company values, you need to have them in mind when you're moving to this future state, and then you can kind of accurately plan. So that's your as is. Second step is to ensure you're adding value. Okay, so value can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, departments, or business, but it's still value. And if you're not addressing a problem, you're not adding value to it. A really good thing there that I've mentioned is cost, quality, and speed. There's 3 kind of areas where value is the most sought after. Can you do this quicker? Can you add more value? Can it be less cost? Things like that. So when you start talking in those terms and you're coming from a really good base or foundation, you're a lot more likely to get buy-in from the various levels that you need it in. So that's that to be state. And then, like I said, there's the how-to, but that's a whole different presentation. And I've just put some resources on here just to have a look at, and we can go through these in a little bit of just to analyze them a little bit further. We've talked about gap, we've talked about SWOT, we've talked about pestle. I'm going to leave the next one because I know Ali likes to talk about this. We've talked about the balanced proposition canvas. Everyone should know what a balanced scorecards are. I've put SIAM, Prosky and ADCAR just because they came up in other presentations. SIAM is that service integration where it's up another level and it's across the whole business. It's not just kind of siloed, and they're looking at end-to-end delivery. So that's another thing that's a great thing to research from this perspective. Gives you a really bigger picture view. And then this Prosky ADCAR model, this is more in that organizational change perspective where you are understanding and taking into consideration the actual impact on the end user. So it's a great process to look at to actually get someone to adopt the change that you're trying to do. And the last one at the bottom is that Net Promoter Score and Voice of the Customer. Two really, really good things to have a look at, because in this day and age of your Airbnbs and your Ubers and your instant reviews and your instant access to social media, and more often than not, customers want something, and if they don't get it, they'll go somewhere else. Hence, in most managed services, it's a shadow IT because they can't go somewhere else. Literally, but they'll go and buy their own stuff just to get around it. Or if it is in that kind of external mode, they'll just go somewhere else. So that Net Promoter Score and Voice of the Customer thing's a really, really important thing to research and understand. Alim, I'm going to let you talk about the CMMI model because I know it's a passion of yours. So.
Yeah. But before I do, so I can come on to CMMI, but there is a question, and it's actually a very interesting question, one that is prompting me to go and do some research on, but I can't answer it, unfortunately, but I'll ask the question. So have you seen anyone using process mining techniques for the as-is state definition? So whether it's yourself, John, or anyone else on the call, do you have any familiarity with process mining techniques? I personally don't, but as I said, I'll look into it. Can anyone answer that question?
Yeah, so from my perspective, it's not an in-depth knowledge kind of part for me. It's more of a process mining for me is about that data-driven thing again. It's the use of algorithms, it's the use of kind of automation, all that data-driven information to get to have a different insight and to take some different insights on processes. That's about the level that I've taken it to. So I don't know if there's anybody else on the call. And that's another avenue that you can put in. The more information you get, the better your decision making is going to be. It's just probably restricted by time. That's all. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
Yeah, I'm looking at it online now. It actually looks very interesting. So thank you, CMH. I don't know what your real name is, but your acronym CMH. So I'll definitely look into it, but I can't help. Anyone else use process mining?
Yeah, I have used it. I can't remember the name of the tool that we used it, but we used it about 6 months ago at my last job, and that really just was a tool that was able to keep track of, you would set something up. You would set, you were going to measure flows through systems or maybe like how long it took kind of business process to get from A to Z in the business process, and then that's all fed into a database, and it gives you information really about how long things are taking, and it might mean that you're very, very good at 80%, but for 5%, you're actually spending more time on a small part, and if you were able to concentrate on improvements of that particular business process, then you could speed up the whole thing. If I can remember the name of the tool, then I'll send it to you, Alan, and you can.
For sure. And that partly answers the question anyway, in that the person who was asking, CMH, was asking if anyone's used it. So look here, we have one example on the call anyway, but I don't think it's that common, or I haven't come across it. But from what Hilary described, the closest model that I've used, I've come to executing what's being said, but it wasn't in an automated way. So it was, looking at where a process works and where the issues are with that process. So whether it's the 5% or where it is using the Lean Six Sigma method, and identifying what the issue is, and looking at defects and looking at where you can address those defects to make it more effective, more efficient. But that's, from my perspective, when I've used that, it has all been done in a more manual method. So seeing how that could be automated with tools, I think, is great. So that's definitely a learning part that I will take away from this call. But yeah, Hilary, if you can share the link, and I'll share it with everyone. So thank you for that. Anyone else? Any questions? So again, before I take up any time and go into CMMI or anything, let me throw this back out there one more time to say, so is anyone on this session going through an AsIs or ToBe type scenario now, where you are looking to improve an operating model, or you're doing your AsIs analysis and you're struggling and you've hit a hurdle, just like Jason asked earlier? Anyone else who's having some challenges that they would like to just share with us?
Hi, it's Jason again. So I'm currently doing one, and the challenge, as I alluded to at the top of the call, was resistance to spending too much time trying to understand the existing ToBe. The existing state. I face another challenge in that the requester, who is a senior manager, has decided what the target model should look like before the analysis is completed. So to some extent, I feel constrained with promoting what I would call best practice. So how I've sort of overcome that is to propose a two-stage sort of operating model change. The interim model is in effect what the director has in his mind as the fix, but the final model is actually based on ITIL, and I'm trying to map between the two. So yeah, I'm currently going through it. That is my challenge, in that the answer was decided for me before I was even asked to do the work. But I've tried to find a way around that by accepting the instruction as the interim model, and then building on it into a final model.
Okay. Yeah, go on, Tola.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a bit of a comment there. I think one of the things which you could do, I don't know, it might roll you back slightly, is actually try and get them to articulate what benefits they're trying to realize. And those benefits will have KPIs associated with them. And with that, you can then define the outcomes they want to enable them to get to those, KPIs. And because you've got outcomes, then you've got outputs. And that will actually steer you in the right direction in terms of what the eventual vision, plan, or whatever is going to look like. So because I mean, their bosses, that they've got KPIs, they know what they want in terms of that. And also that will then provide you good rationale as to why to steer it in a particular direction. So that might just be a bit of a pointer, that's all.
Yeah. Thanks, Tola.
Yes, thank you very much.
Anyone else want to comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I completely agree with Tola. The starting point for any of these kind of changes really needs to be, what are your strategic drivers? Why are you undertaking this change? And granted, your manager, the director, has defined what the target operating model should look like, but there needs to be a basis behind it. And typically, what I've done in the past is, well, we look at the strategic drivers, and these are the issues that the organization is facing. For example, staff retention is high, or efficiency and effectiveness is low. And then you look at what your objectives are to coming off those. If you want to improve your recruitment processes and retention processes, and then you identify your benefits that come off that, and be very specific about what those benefits are. I think if you follow a systematic process, then that should give you the evidence and the impetus for your change. And even if your director has already defined what that is, perhaps it's a good thing to go back to them and say, could you explain the rationale behind these changes, especially if they seem to be quite different from what you say the data is suggesting.
Yeah. And Jason, let me just add one bit then, and I'm deliberately going to be controversial. Okay, so just to give an alternative view as well. Okay, so please forgive me, because I'm not saying that the view I'm about to give I 100% believe, because I know what good practice is, and I know you're meant to do AsIs and ToBe, and that is what I do. However, I have also seen situations where a company, an individual, a team spend weeks, months on the AsIs model, understanding all the current state, et cetera, 6 weeks, let's say. And then because they've spent so long on that, and then they get to doing the ToBe stuff and making some improvements, they don't quite correlate it to all of the AsIs learning that they've done anyway. So they're kind of muddling through and doing some of the ToBe stuff, like perhaps the director wants in this case. And I have seen examples where that 6 weeks of work on the AsIs was actually wasted time. Okay, but I know it's good. I know that's how it's meant to be done. So that one other thing therefore I'll add, and that's a bit controversial, is that perhaps in this case, it's more, rather than it's kind of AsIs and ToBe and seeing it as an operating model, it sounds like it's more service improvement type activities that are needed based on this director's vision. So if he or she has a vision of what they want, and let's call that the target operating model, for example, but maybe it's not that, it's just a vision, then it's a range of activities that need to be done in kind of assumed areas to get into that direction. And at least if you're kind of going bottom up a bit in that sense, or top down from the director, then it also gives you a chance to learn actually in the job while you're doing some of the improvements. So anyway, I just wanted to give another view that, look, there are cases where actually maybe forgetting AsIs completely or to a large extent might be the right choice.
And I think it's completely valid. And in fact, I'm currently thinking that maybe it is a service improvement initiative as opposed to an operating model definition. So yeah, it's one of those that currently for me is on the sort of the grey line between it could go either way at the moment in terms of whether it's a full model or whether it's just an improvement to existing.
Yeah.
One thing that you could sort of include, and just to what Alim was saying, is that if you have this target operating model, when you do your AsIs analysis, you base it on the preferred target area model to say, to get from where we are right now to where we need to be, what is it that's not working in the AsIs model, and then use that to define your starting point.
I like that, because if you use the methodology which Dev and Alim are talking about, essentially you're actually starting from your vision, how it links in with your strategic objectives. Then you're looking at your benefits. Then you're looking at your outputs. Then you're looking, your outcomes. Then your outputs. So essentially, what you would do, you actually start off with your ToBe model. So you spend time creating your ToBe, but then you now, as Deb said again, you now then, to get to ToBe, what do I have to do as AsIs? So therefore you will not spend too much time on the AsIs bit. And then you'll be able to actually sort of do what you need to do.
Exactly. So I just wanted to be open to that, right? And I'm glad it generated some of that conversation. And then, of course, the final bit I'll add to that before we'll see if there's other questions is sometimes you just need to build some momentum and trust, and you need to start your journey, don't you, before you get confidence from people. So anyway, just, you know, I'm sure you're factoring that in anyway, but yeah, maybe that kind of quick win, service improvement, let's get some momentum going approach in this scenario may be better, right? So anyway, but good question, good conversation. Let's see if there's any other questions from anyone. Anyone else? Okay, and if there isn't, so I'll just touch on that one last subject then before we wrap up, before I give it back to John. So he set me up nicely for CMMI, I think. The model that I, frequently use. And Jason, back to one of your earlier questions, it also aligns well with ISO standards like ISO 20000 for service management, is the 5-level maturity model of 0, 1, depending on who you listen to, being the chaotic, and 5 being the utmost kind of perfectionist, really mature, everything's working how it's meant to be working. And then across the various different processes of the operating model, there will be different parts that you'll obviously mature at different levels. So it may be okay if it's at level 1 or 2 maturity for a particular process or a particular part of the operating model, whereas for others, perhaps you're aiming for 4 or 5, level 4 or 5 maturity. So that's one that if you're not using or familiar with, and this isn't just to yourself, Jason, this is to anyone, I would advocate strongly in terms of using CMMI as part of measuring where you are going to go to and how you're on your, how you are there on the journey. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say to that. I don't think there's any other questions coming in, so we may actually be on time and doing well. So, John, is there anything else you want to add before I wrap up?
Yeah, Alan, I've just got 2 things. So one of the questions that came in was just asking something around DevOps and Agile and how that can be accommodated in the new ways of working and operating models. From my perspective, there isn't a choice on this. Agile and DevOps are the way that it's gone and still going to be going. We are in an industry of that fail fast, fail often. It's not going to change. Customers demand a lot more. There's a lot more choice out for everybody. So I personally believe the days of a 12-month planning project to have a big bang approach at the end are gone. We're in too much of a changing environment for that to happen anymore. I'm sure in the finance world it could happen, given that that's quite stable. And the last thing I just wanted to touch on was, we've just gone through like a presentation and stuff, and obviously when you're doing presentations like this, it's got to be based on some level of idealism. This is how ideally you would like to do, and everybody out there understands that you've got to add a really big dose of realism to this as well. So we are not in a company that's going to give us $1 million to spend 6 months finding out beautiful models about AsIs, and then having being able to go through all these processes and bring organizational change managers in and do. We're just not part of that. So you've got to obviously do what's in your own responsibility areas and what you're capable of doing. I just want to point out that it is still really, really important that we use the value side of things, to provide value and to address a problem. No matter what level you're going to do it, that's the fundamentals of success.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Perfect. Thank you, John. So thank you all for joining. I hope you benefited from it. And this recording will be shared in the Slack channel. So have a good day, wherever you are.